All right, welcome into another edition of the Musketeer Report Podcast. Today is March 10th, 2025. Xavier is coming off a 76-68 win over Providence on Senior Day. The Musketeers ended the regular season with a record of 21-10 overall, 13-7 in Big East play. They are ranked 42nd on KenPom, 44th in the net, and they are currently the last team in the projected field of 68 on Bracket Matrix. We've got plenty to talk about. Paul Fritschner is with me. Paul, let's start with the win over Providence on Saturday. It wasn't the prettiest of games that they've played recently. Davion McKnight wasn't good. Dante Maddox wasn't good. I don't think Dalen Swain was at his best. Sean Miller said that even in the post-game press conference compared to what he's been playing like recently. But yet they pretty much controlled the game, especially in the second half.
Yeah, they did. And it definitely felt more nerve-wracking to me than what was the game before, the Butler game. Like the Butler game for me, even though it was on the road, I was never really anxious about that game as somebody that was desperately hoping that this team could rattle off their seventh straight win to get to the NCAA tournament, to set themselves up for it at least. But I had a different feeling in that Butler game than I did in the Providence game. I don't know why, because Providence, that game's at Cintas. I probably should have felt better about that going into the second half, but it just felt like the way Providence was mucking the game up, that they would be able to stay in it. And then Bensley Joseph scores 27 points. He hits 7 threes, and Xavier just wasn't able to really ever put him away. It felt kind of similar in a way down the stretch to what happened at the AMP a month ago, just from the perspective, not that Xavier was up 20 and gave it away, but just from the perspective of the Friars never went away. They had the fight. They never went away. Bensley Joseph was hitting shot after shot after shot. But yeah, you're right. I guess in the second half, there was never, to me, that Providence push where they took the lead and you're thinking, Xavier's really going to have to dig deep to win this game, because Xavier always felt like they were on the front foot and they had the edge, the advantage, that they were making the shots they needed.
Yeah, and maybe that's the better way to say it, is there was never that wave of momentum late in the second half by Providence. Like once Xavier, especially in the final 4 minutes, which is where Xavier has struggled putting games away after they've gotten a lead. Once they built that lead up to, I think 11 was the largest point there late in the second half, they didn't relinquish that lead. I mean, they put the game away pretty much over the final 4 minutes, kept it close to double digits. It bounced around between like 8 to 10 pretty much the rest of the way, I think. But I thought that was good to see. And that's kind of a sign of where things have changed for this team, because how many times have we been at that post-game press conference with Sean Miller this year talking about, hey, your team kind of had another letdown late game, almost gave a lead up or did give a lead up. What happened there? And he tells us, that's a major issue for our team. It's been a problem all year. That hasn't been the case recently. That's even in the games that they've had a big lead, they've really kind of held on to those bigger leads recently.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's a big strength of this team going into the NCAA or into the Big East tournament, which if you had said that a month and a half ago, we would have gotten laughed off this show. But now here we are in the first week of March, second week of March. And one of the strengths of this team lately has been closing games and being able to understand what they need to do in the final 2 wars of a game to actually put the game away instead of allowing a team back in it. Seton Hall was the exception at Seton Hall, but Seton Hall did that to UConn the same way they did it to Xavier. I don't really have as many worries right now as I did in mid-January about what this team does in the final 8 minutes of the game. Are they susceptible to it? Could it happen again? Sure, because there are plenty of data points that we can point to that it happened this year and they could fall back into the rut. But for me, when you climb a mountain like that, when you finally turn the corner, it's hard to revert back.
Right? Well, the question is, like, what happens when they face some better pressure teams, right? You got Marquette, then you potentially face St. John's, which is the worst team to face if you struggle with that in the conference. So that is still a bit of a question mark, I guess, when they ramp up the defensive intensity on the other side in the Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden. But it's definitely been a major improvement and a big part of why the team has turned a corner down the stretch here to win 7 straight. I don't know that there's a lot to talk about else from the Providence game, but Paul, just kind of recapping the stretch we've been on. I mean, I'll put my hand up first to admit it. I was sitting here, I guess 7 games ago, talking about how, look, this team's just not going to make the NCAA tournament. They would have to win out. And this team has never shown throughout the season that they can be consistent enough to win 7 Big East games in a row. That's just not going to happen. It would take a miracle. And lo and behold, they have won 7 games in a row. You can sit there, you can say they were favored to win these games, they were supposed to win them, what have you. But at the end of the day, I don't think many people, I know I certainly didn't, I don't think many people thought that this would be possible, whatever it was, a month ago when they were staring down a 7-game slate that they had to win out.
I remember sitting there on the post-game spaces after the Marquette win at Marquette, and I felt like the team had turned a corner enough that they were a good enough team to play their way into the NCAA tournament conversation. And then after Xavier lost at Creighton, I put out a tweet saying that Xavier would likely need to go 9-0 to make the NCAA tournament. We'll see a week from now whether that 9-0 down the stretch or if the 8-1 will be good enough as far as regular season games go. If they had gone 9-0, they would definitely be in the tournament right now. There wouldn't be a question. And that's, again, what I've said multiple times is what I should have said was to be comfortably in. 8-1 has put them in a position now that at 6:30 next week after the selection show's wrapping up, potentially, hopefully, that they've heard their name called. And what they've done in the last 7 games is put together night after night after night of consistent effort. And you'll hear that there are a bunch of scenes in tomorrow night as we record this on Monday and Tuesday night's All-In docuseries. I'm really excited for everybody listening to this to watch that show because there are a lot of very poignant quotes from the seniors on this team. We had the opportunity to interview the seniors and talk about their Xavier experience, but also to talk about what this season has been like and the adversity they've gone through and just hearing their answers about, especially Zach Fremantle gave a great quote about what the beginning of the season was like and what they thought the season was going to look like as a team versus what they realized they needed to do to turn a corner and, get to this point in the tournament. And I'll go back to this. I know I'm beating a dead horse, but I'll go back to it. How many times, Rick, in sports media or as a fan, do you overblow a players only meeting? It gets talked about so much at the professional level, collegiate level, whatever. The players only, have they called a players only meeting yet? But there's no denying the fact that the day after the St. John's game, when Xavier got punked, they're in their own words, they got bullied, they got just destroyed on the glass against St. John's at Cintas, and they called a players only meeting the next day. And it's very clear that from that day on, the entire outlook of the season changed. The team's changed. The mentality has changed. The effort has changed. Everything about the team changed because of that loss to St. John's that night in January, which is why I'm really interested. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but just sitting here talking about this, I'm really interested to see if Xavier matches up with St. John's on Friday night, what that game looks like, because the whole season changed after that game at Cintas. And now they've put together an effort 7 games in a row where they've shot the ball better. They were always a good 3-point shooting team. They're always a good free throw shooting team, but just putting up higher scoring games at the end of the day. I know it's a counting number, but just scoring more points in a game than they had been earlier in the season.
And making clutch shots, when it matters, game on the line shots.
Ryan Conwell playing as well as he has. I mean, he's the first Musketeer since 2019, Najee Marshall, to score 20 points in 4 consecutive games. He's playing well at the right time. He gets 3rd team All Big East. Zach Fremantle gets 2nd team All Big East. Things turned a corner there.
Well, you have to give credit to the players, certainly. I mean, it's always about the players first and foremost. And players only meeting, it is what it is to some extent. I mean, I think you're right. You can't deny the fact that they turned it around after that happened. Yeah. But I would also say you've got to give a ton of credit to this coaching staff.
Oh, yeah.
With a lesser experienced head coach running this program right now, I mean, this is a 7-win Big East team. The situation they were in, I mean, they found themselves in, the way things were spiraling, the lack of toughness and pride that they displayed in that St. John's loss. I mean, I don't think a lot of people had hope that they were going to figure this out. And I mean, even going back to like the Villanova loss, right? Like I think people would have said, they're not going to, that's it. They're done. And they continue to get better and get better. And the way they've finished off this season is nothing short of impressive. I mean, by the players certainly, but also by this coaching staff and Sean Miller. So you got to give them a ton of credit.
And I think what's interesting is looking offensively at how many sets they're running now, how many just designed offensive sets they're running, as opposed to maybe earlier in the season where there was a lot of, their flow offense, a lot of those things where there was a lot of motion and there were a lot of just, I would say, giving the players an opportunity now, like Dante Maddox, and taking some of that pressure off Ryan Conwell or Zach Fremantle to have to just go out and score 1 million points every game.
Well, that's the difference having a coach like Sean.
And that's your point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like you can't. There are other coaches that we've seen, maybe even in this town, that they're spiraling and their team can't find a good offensive possession or things aren't working offensively, and they just keep running out and doing the same thing over and over. Like Sean saw that, hey, the flow offense is great. We've had a lot of success with that, and they're still running it. Obviously, they're still getting a ton out of that, but like, some of these guys need a little more help. Some of these guys need something run for them to get going a little bit more often. And they've done a great job of hitting the right buttons for each guy down the stretch here and getting some of these guys going. Not always all of them on the same night, obviously, like we just talked about with the Providence game, but enough nights that they've been much more successful down the stretch here. If I asked you, what's the biggest thing? Like what's been the biggest reason for the turnaround, in your opinion, and the 7-game winning streak? What would you throw out there?
Oh man, that's a good question, Rick. One thing to turn things around. Do you have something? I'm trying to think of one. I have
thing. Two answers that I think are the obvious answers. They're kind of broad.
All right,
but the first I would say is the defense. The defense to me is just unexpected. I never saw this coming for this team before the season when they assembled this group, and even as the year got going on. I mean, I think if you look at the advanced metrics on Bart Torvik or whatever, where you can set the date for it, they're one of the better defensive teams in the entire country over the last 7 games, certainly, but even a little bit more than that if you go back over the last 10 or so. I mean, they've really been playing much better on that end of the floor. And I talked about it with Sean in the post-game press conference after the Providence win, that their ability to pressure the ball and get out and extend their defense a little bit more on the perimeter. I asked him, like, what have you done? What have you tweaked to do more of that? And he said it really hasn't been anything in terms of doing different stuff. It's just been the guys finally getting to that point where they are pressuring more and they are extending the defense and playing with more aggressiveness and confidence and getting more deflections. Essentially, that was always the plan. We just weren't executing it and playing with that type of toughness and energy before this point. And I thought that was an interesting answer from him.
Yeah, so February 10th, a month ago today, since February 10th, Xavier obviously 7-0, but by Bart Torvik, you can see it, Xavier's defense 13th in the country. Their offense is 32nd, but the defense is 13th. Xavier 15 overall.
Right. So that just illustrates it right there, Paul. That's perfect. Like, obviously they've been good on the offensive side too. They've shown major improvements there. And we could talk about going back to the offseason, this team was going to be led by its offense. And in some ways, I mean, they still are, but look at that metric right there over this winning streak. It's been defense first in terms of the advanced metrics. So I think that says a lot about the way they finished off the season on that side of the ball. And I just didn't see that coming. So while I thought the team still had offensive upside and Mike could get that going, I didn't necessarily expect them to find the toughness and the ability to put together stops like they have.
The schedule has also helped this team immensely. Just from the fact of how many times, whether we're texting or whether we're saying it on the air, all of us back and forth bouncing around. What I always say that, when guys get down, fans get down, whatever, winning cures all. At the end of the day, winning cures all. And it doesn't matter if you're beating DePaul and Seton Hall or if you're beating Creighton. Winning helps. And having the confidence to go out there and beat a Big East team night in and night out, finish games the way they have. It sounds simple for me to say this, but one of the biggest things in this stretch is that they haven't had to go out there and just get bludgeoned by, St. John's on the glass or whatever, like they did in January, 2 out of 5 games or whatever that insane stretch was. Having a schedule that sets up like this, with how well they're playing, it probably would have been nice if they had maybe like the the UConn game at home a little. They won that game, but like that's a bad example because they won that game. Maybe the Marquette game at home, like that game being this past Saturday instead of Providence, where you could have maybe picked up one more, significant win to move the needle.
Yeah, I wonder. That'd be interesting to think about because, like, what if you lose that game then? Is it better to have these things like interspersed throughout the schedule and a little more even? Or is it better to have this run at the end of the year where, okay, your metrics aren't what you wanted them to be, but at least like anyone who right now who's trying to decipher the bubble. And when you look at these things, it's like, I mean, you're picking nits for sure.
You are, yeah.
The team that's won 7 games in a row to end the season and feels like they're playing really good basketball every time you turn on your TV has got to have a little bit of an edge.
Well, and I didn't necessarily mean that you move the Marquette loss from December to this. Like maybe they play it and Xavier wins that game. You have Fremantle back, whatever. That's more so what I meant. But
yeah,
I think
you're playing so well they could obviously have a better chance of winning it now. I totally got your point. I was just saying, like, I wonder is it worse if you potentially lose that game now versus losing?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Rick, what do we always say? They're humans. It's a group of humans sitting in the room, and we can play this sport to a spreadsheet and the analytics all we want. We could get lost in the quads and the resume metrics and all the numbers and everything else. But at the end of the day, you have a bunch of committee members sitting in a room talking about the NCAA tournament and which teams belong in it. And it's their job to put on an entertaining product and put the best teams into the field and the teams that deserve a spot. And right now, a team that's won 7 in a row, as opposed to, some of these other, I mean, Nebraska, we're talking about Nebraska's not going to make the field, but like Nebraska didn't even make the Big Ten tournament. And we're sitting there talking about them potentially being a bubble team. They didn't make their own conference tournament, right. Like those are the kinds of things. North Carolina kind of faltered a little bit there I know they took that loss to Duke, but there are bubble teams that are just not playing super well right now where, Carolina finished strong until that loss to Duke, but then, Nebraska was firmly in until they completely collapsed. Ohio State and all this. Xavier keeps winning. And does the committee recognize that and just watch the games and recognize the eye test? We're not in the room. We don't know.
We know it's not the end all be all because we know it's not even something that they evaluate anymore. It's no longer like they used to have last 10 games as something that was on their team sheets to evaluate teams by. That's no longer something that they're supposed to look at. But again, it's just got to be part of human nature that sets in a little bit when you're paying more attention right here, trying to decipher, okay, who's like slightly above this other team on the bubble. And every time you watch that team, they're playing really good basketball and look like one of the top teams in the country. So, the other thing I mentioned, the defense. The other thing is Dante Maddox. Like, I think that's the other big storyline that's really kind of brought this offense along to being a more dynamic team. Who was it? I think it was Thad Matta maybe that mentioned when you've got both Ryan Conwell and Dante Maddox going at the same time. It was either McDermott or Matta that said they're a much more difficult team to guard and they're a lot more dynamic on the offensive end. And you could see that. I mean, you could see the impact of Dante Maddox coming in and having these 20-point games. And then maybe the next game he doesn't go off, but the defense is paying attention to him when he's on the floor. They're worried about the fact that he's an over 40% three-point shooter during that stretch.
Well, even Saturday against Providence, he didn't score, but he had 7 assists.
Yeah, you can feel the gravity, right? Like when he's on the floor, you can see the defense paying attention to him. And that has changed this team. And it's funny, I'm not doing the like I told you so thing or anything, because obviously I wasn't right with these takes, but the bold predictions article that I got ridiculed for.
I read that today. I read that a few, yeah.
It got brought back up. Someone posted about it in the message board. And the one thing that I thought was interesting about it is I mentioned that Dante Maddox, one of the bold predictions was Dante Maddox won't start, but will average double figures, I think. Or no, will be a top 3 scorer, I believe is what I said. And I said there will be 5 double-figure scorers for this team. And it's funny that like they struggled all year and that those things looked completely off base, like a silly idea. And then now when they've been playing their best, all of a sudden it's like, well, guess what happened? Dante Maddox has been averaging right under 10 points a game, shooting over 44% from 3 or whatever it is, 14 assists, 10 steals, 3 turnovers during that 7-game winning streak. Like he's been really good all of a sudden and giving them another score to go along with those other guys. Davion McKnight's been like just under 10 points a game all year. And then you do have 3 guys who are averaging double figures. So you almost, when you've been good here at the end of the year, you almost have had those 5 guys averaging double figures, been able to swing the ball around the perimeter and be a more dynamic offense that's hard to match up with. It feels like they've almost gotten to the point that we thought that they would before the season.
Yeah, and Dante Maddox was going to be my answer, so I'm not going to drag this point on any longer. Dante Maddox was going to be my answer there as I thought through it. So yeah, I think having that extra scoring option, as I've said a million times, being able to have somebody off the bench that you can trust in the backcourt, Dante brought that.
So I saw something else. This appeared on the message board, and I guess the Roll Blob podcast guys posted this somewhere. So shout out to the Roll Blob podcast. Check them out. They posted something, a poll of some sort that was about expectations for the season. Were your expectations met, missed, or surpassed? I would imagine it depends right now. I mean, the season isn't over yet, right? We're just entering the best part heading into the postseason, and there's a lot of hope about what's still in store for this team. But what would you say, Paul, based on just the fact that this topic of conversation is circulating around the Xavier fan base this week?
Yeah, so their tweet was, Xavier finishes the regular season 21-10, 13-7 in conference play. How do you view the regular season? The 3 options were met expectations, exceeded expectations, or didn't meet expectations. Met expectations on 162 votes, got 51% of the votes. Didn't meet expectations, got 41%. Exceeded, got the other 7%. I thought a lot about this when we were talking about this, and I would lean, as weird as it is to say, it's been a roller coaster of a ride of a season, and anybody around the program would admit that. There have been a lot of ups and there have been a lot of downs, especially in the beginning of the year. There were a lot of downs. Losing to Cincinnati was certainly something that you could say didn't meet expectations. But at the end of the day, this team came up 2 wins in the Big East short of their Big East win total from when they got a 3 seed 2 years ago. They beat everybody in the Big East at least once, except for St. John's. They had 2 players make an all Big East, an all league team. Just on paper, from what this team has done so far, we went into the season thinking this team, or I don't want to speak for you, at least me, I will admit this. You could go back and dig up the takes. I was somebody that thought that this team would be expected, because of their seeding, to be a second weekend team. That they would wear white in the first 2 games of the NCAA tournament. That clearly has not been met. But beyond that, with an opportunity still to go out and make the tournament, it's hard for me to sit here and say that they didn't meet expectations from that perspective. As weird as it is to say, because I know, being on the bubble from what we expected in the beginning of the season, where we thought they were going to score 95 points a game every game, and we saw them dismantle Dayton in the exhibition, and the expectations were sky high for a team that could potentially make a Final Four run. After Lucina Traore got hurt, I really significantly pulled back on what I thought the ceiling for this team could be. And I think now, given his injury and everything else, I'd say it's pretty close to meeting my expectations.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't even know where I was trying to look in my email while you were talking there and find the predictions that we had. I'm guessing, I want to say I did not have Xavier finishing 13-7 in Big East play. I think I had them with a worse record than that, to be honest. My expectation, I would say they probably slightly missed expectations for the regular season, based on the fact that we expected them to take care of business more so in the non-conference schedule. And we didn't expect them to be fighting for their lives on the bubble and be the last team in. I think all of us thought they would be back in the tournament and not in a play-in game, not are they going to get in or not, but it might be a 9 or 10 seed, but be in the tournament. That was kind of my expectation for this team. I took some heat for it when I said I thought it was a bold take to say that they would win an NCAA tournament game. I felt pretty good about that possibility, and I think fans thought that was silly, that they were going to do more than that before the season. So if that was your perspective, then they probably didn't meet expectations during the regular season. But I would say that expectations were slightly missed, and that's before you factor in the loss of Lucina Traore. When you add in, they lost their starting center for the year, Well, that's got to change your calibration a little bit. You got to recalibrate your expectations there. And at that point, then, to say they finished 13-7 in Big East play and they did turn the season around, you're pretty darn close to hitting the expectations for the year. And I'm not going to argue with anyone and said, no, I expected more than this team to be last team in the tournament here as we head into the Big East tournament. But, obviously, again, if you have Lucina Traore in there, I feel like you can flip at least one or two of these really close call wins, and Xavier is then comfortably in.
I think a lot of posters on the message board worded it well, where they said they missed expectations from the preseason, but greatly surpassed expectations from New Year's Day.
Yeah, that's a great call. I mean, no doubt. Once they lost to St. John's January 7th, it's like, okay, we're in store for a really rough year. They're 1-4 in Big East play. They might not win more than 6-7 games in Big East play here. Yeah, they completely surpassed expectations after that point.
So I just pulled it up in my good old notes app here. My preseason prediction was 24-7 overall and 14-6 in the Big East. So I missed it by one game.
Okay. So my guess is I would have been at least a game or two under.
I think you were 13-7.
13-7.
I think you were 13. I think you were right. So I had 10 and 1 in the non-conference. I had them losing to Michigan. I did not have them losing to TCU or Cincinnati. I predicted both of those as wins. I mean, I'm not going to go through the Big East schedule because that's all sorts of messed up. But I 14-6 was where I had them. So we were pretty close. You were spot on, I think, and I was one game off.
Yeah, again, like it didn't feel good for most of the year in terms of how they got to that number. But by the end of the year, when you look up and you see 13-7 in Big East play, I mean,
yep,
that's a pretty good year in the conference. It's the non-conference really, which is where they're like, if you flip the UC game and the TCU game, then this season is everything you expected it to be, I think.
And the other thing too, Xavier was picked third in the conference by the coaches in the preseason. They finished fourth. I mean, I know the optics of it. There are people listening to this right now, banging their heads going, fellas, Xavier's on the bubble. They greatly missed expectations. But when you really break it down step by step, like we just did, it's hard to say they really missed them by all that much. And just the other thing to keep in mind, there's potentially a lot of basketball left to be played that would change a lot of people's minds on the answer to this question. So I did have the Big East order of finish. I wasn't that far off. I did have UConn winning the league. I think everybody probably did. Maybe some people had Marquette. I had Marquette fifth. So Marquette fifth, that was the one that I was on. St. John's for me was fourth. I had Creighton. I had that right at third. But UConn, and then I had Xavier actually finish in second, which looking back on that, definitely doesn't make any sense that I had Xavier finishing second at 14-6. But, preseason Pauly with the rose-colored glasses probably got in my way a little bit.
I had Xavier finishing fourth in the Big East order finish. I had UConn, Creighton, St. John's, Xavier, Providence as my top five. So that Providence one looks bad, and obviously UConn didn't pan out either. But yeah, looking back, I had 23-8 overall, 13-7 in Big East play as my expectation for Xavier. And it's funny, like we were just talking about, you go back, you flip a couple games. The games I would have needed to have flipped was the Michigan loss. I had that as an expected win, the second game at Suncoast Credit Arena. And then I had TCU. I had TCU as a loss. I had UC as a win, expected win, and they lost that one. So you flip those two games, and it's exactly where you expected the season to be. And again, Lucina Traore, can you sneak out two of those wins with them? Maybe not Michigan, but can you get TCU and Cincinnati with them? Like you could.
Yeah, that's been my point all year, is that you didn't need Lucina to be a 20-15 guy every night. I think that's where we've fallen into maybe a bit of a rut, that you didn't need him to be this, all-American guy to flip some of these games. When I say I had them losing that second game down there against Michigan or Virginia Tech, whoever they were going to play, I thought they'd go 1-1 and they'd lose that second game. But you only needed Lucina to change a couple of possessions or get one or two extra stops against TC. It's not like they were getting blown out. They lost 5 games by a combined, I forget what my stat was, but 20 points, I think. I mean, just a crazy low number. that they were right there. They just needed him to flip a couple.
Yeah, I'll say kudos to you on that, because I was wrong about that earlier in the year, especially, coming off the St. John's loss. It's one thing to say, oh, you lost 1 or 2 games by a possession or two, and one guy could have flipped that, but you keep losing close games. At a certain point, it just feels like the team is flawed, and there's more missing than just one center who's probably not going to be much of an offensive piece for you, or at least by my expectations. So that's where I felt like he probably wasn't enough to make a difference on the season. But with the way they turned it around at the end of the year, you go back and you think a little more toughness, a little more rebounding in some of those games where they did have leads late and they were right there and just couldn't finish. And yeah, now it feels like he might have been the missing link all along, at least to get you to an 8 seed, a 7 seed, something like that.
And to go back to what we said a few minutes ago about what changed and how well they're playing offensively now, and they've run more sets and taken pressure off of guys like Ryan and Zach. If Lacina's on the floor, he's just physically taking more pressure off of Zach just by the minutes that he's playing, that Zach can play more to his style, or maybe even if Zach's not in the game because Lacina's playing that 5. I know Zach would have probably preferred to play the 4, and they would have tried to go 2 bigs, have them on the court together. But even still, in situations where Zach's on the bench because Lacina's in the game, those are trustworthy minutes that you can have, where you couldn't at that point in the season trust John to give you those minutes. Now you can. The big medication, you can put him out there and get him some minutes. But
what did you just say?
Hughley, the 4th, the IV, the big medication.
The big medication.
Shout out All In Dan. Yeah.
All right.
Anyway, go ahead.
All right. Let's talk about some bracketology real quick. I know we've already touched on it a little bit, but just sort of rehashing. Xavier is the last team in the field on bracket matrix right now. A lot of the top bracketologists agreed with that. That's one thing I like to do is I look at bracket matrix to get the feel for where things are at. But as most of us know that follow this stuff, not all of those brackets are updated every time. That the site updates daily, but not all those brackets are being updated daily. So then I like to go in, check the rankings. If you go to the rankings page on Bracket Matrix, it'll list out, hey, here's the top. They list them out in order, however many people are participating. But I like to go through like the top for 1 through 15 or 20, say who's updated since the last game was played, over the weekend or whatever, and what are they saying? So I say, what are the best bracketologists saying? I just did that exercise this morning as we're recording this on Monday, and 9 of the top 10 that had updated their bracketology since Xavier's win over Providence had Xavier in the field. All of them had them as one of the last 4 teams in. Some of them had them as the very last team in. So all of them would have them as a play-in game, playing in Dayton. Paul, how confident are you that the Musketeers are solidly in the field regardless of what happens on Thursday?
I don't. So I closed out of one podcast and opened the link to this one. I was doing the Field of 68's Fielding the 68, their bracketology show with Rocco Miller and Brad Wachtel, who are 2 of the best in the business at what they do. And both of them had Xavier in the field. In fact, as you talk about Bracket Matrix, it just updated for today, March 10th. There were 87 brackets a part of the matrix today. That number fluctuates based on how many people, update them in the last few days. There were 87 brackets included in today's matrix. Xavier appeared in 75 of the 87. That is by far, not even close to the next highest percentage that Xavier had been in. I think they were at like 30% of brackets or 40% of brackets yesterday.
That's a big bump.
That's a huge bump. They're in almost every bracket now, but they are not safely in. I would say that just going based on what we talked about on the show just a few minutes ago before I joined this show, that Xavier is definitely susceptible to bid thieves this week, and that's the biggest thing. You've already avoided one because Drake won the Missouri Valley. Rick, you're probably going to put this out tonight. I would, if you're a late night owl like I am, you're rooting for Gonzaga and St. Mary's to win their 2 games tonight, because if they both win, then there won't be a bid thief out of the WCC. Pepperdine's playing well. San Francisco could steal a bid, but if Gonzaga and St. Mary's both win tonight, there won't be a bid thief there. The 2 conferences that I'm looking at for bid thieves are the A-10, where VCU just has trouble winning that conference tournament. I think they won it in 2023, but they've had trouble winning the A-10 tournament. Obviously, so has Dayton. They haven't won it in forever, but VCU has a lot of trouble winning the A10, so that's one I'm looking at. The other one that I'm nervous for if I'm a Xavier fan is the American. And the reason the American makes me nervous, well, there's two reasons. One is because it's just a tournament where Memphis is susceptible to not playing well every once in a while. They just have these weird clunker games this year, Memphis has. And if they put up one of those stinkers, especially in a conference tournament game, the AAC is a one bid league this year. So if Memphis loses before they win the AAC title, the American, if they lose before winning the American title, there goes another bid. And that kind of makes me nervous because if they're playing in the American title game, that's at 3:15 on Sunday afternoon. And if Xavier doesn't win the Big East tournament, you're sitting there at 3:15 on Sunday afternoon watching Memphis. And if Xavier's right on the cut line, I mean, what the committee does is they put a couple of contingency brackets together. And, you know, if Memphis wins the AAC, then one gets sent to CBS. And if they get upset and one team gets knocked out because there's a bid thief, then the other bracket gets sent to CBS. So there is definitely some intrigue with bid thieves this week. But that is, to me, where Xavier is the most susceptible. I think if they beat Marquette on Thursday, that'll double their quad one win total. It's kind of a catch-22 because that Marquette win is not looking as great as it was back in January when they beat them originally. Marquette has gone on a slide here over their last 5 games, but it's still a quad one win. That's what matters. And not only that, it's a quad one road win. If they get a second win over Marquette, that would, you know, that they would be feeling great at that point, barring 5, 6, 7 bid stealers. And then if they were to beat St. John's on Friday night, I mean, it would be, to me, it would be impossible to leave Xavier out at that point. To have a Big East team defeat the Big East regular season champion, to play for a Big East title, at that point you would have 23 wins on the season. You'd have 15 wins against conference opponents. You'd have 3 quad one wins. If UConn goes on a little bit of a run in the Big East tournament, that could get bumped up to quad one. You could be talking about 4 quad one wins at that point. Xavier would not get left out. I just went on my bracketology monologue. So to back up here and just answer your question straight up, Xavier would do themselves a massive favor by winning on Thursday against Marquette. I don't think they're out if they lose because it's not a bad loss, but winning would make them feel a lot better.
Yeah, that's right. They can't do any damage to their resume because they're playing a quad one game against Marquette at Madison Square Garden. I am fully of the opinion, I've shared this multiple times, that you better have your ticket punched before you go to your conference tournament, because I think oftentimes the conference tournaments are ignored by the committee. However, in Xavier's case this year, they are one pretty unique situation where it feels like that first conference tournament game means more for them than maybe anybody else in the country, because the big thing holding them back is that 1-8 quad one record, right? You beat Marquette now, you no longer have that 1-8 next to your name. It's 2-8. I mean, it might go to 2-9 if you lose the next round game, whatever. But like, it's still not a great record, but it's no longer you just got the one quad one win. Because that really is pretty glaring when you look at their resume and you're comparing it to the other teams on the bubble. I mean, fortunately for them, the team that probably has the better metrics than them, that currently is the next team out, or the first team out right after Xavier, according to Bracket Matrix, is North Carolina. But they also only have one quad one win.
And what I would also remind you is that North Carolina's athletic director is the chair of the selection committee, and he is supposed to recuse himself from the room when they talk about North Carolina. But when, you know,
so that's part of the conversation is bid thieves, right? Like you brought up the American and what have you. But the other part of the conversation is what might the bracketologists have wrong right now, because the sport has changed a lot over time, and we already talked about it. You really have to get into the details to find separation between these teams on the bubble right now. Paul, when I look at this, there are 2 teams to me that people aren't going to like hearing this because they're from the big conferences, but North Carolina and Texas would scare me if I'm a Xavier fan right now.
Texas doesn't scare me as much as North Carolina does.
Tell me why not on Texas.
Texas has,
because of the overall record?
Texas is just at the end of the day, they've accumulated. Go ahead.
Let me just throw this out there. So they're going to play a quad one game against Vanderbilt. And then if they win that, they would play a quad one game against Texas A&M.
Yeah, they certainly can do work this week at the SEC tournament. And we're, you know what we're doing? We're ping-ponging back and forth right here on whether conference tournaments matter, but they certainly can do work.
Yeah, and I'm full again. I'm of the opinion that it's not. You should have it already cut out. But if we're talking about Xavier is going to punch their ticket by beating Marquette and getting a second quad one win, then we also have to talk about what would 2 quad one wins in a row mean for a Texas team that already has 5 quad one wins. I think they're like 5-10 or something.
They're 5-10 in quad one. They don't have a quad 3 or 4 loss. So that is very much.
If they get to 7-11, Paul, and a quad one record of 7-11, and they do get to 19 total wins, because like a team with 17 total wins is hard to put in the tournament.
Yeah.
But a team with 19 total wins, I feel like that's palatable.
It is. One thing that the committee doesn't like a lot of is home losses, and that's really held Texas back this year. Now, I know they were against good teams, but Texas has lost to Auburn, Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia, and Oklahoma at home. That is a lot of home losses to swallow. And one of the biggest things that the committee looks at is where a game was played. And so I think that's what could hold Texas back at the end of the day. I'm way more nervous if I'm a Xavier fan about North Carolina. I think North Carolina is closer to the bubble than a lot would like to admit. Everybody keeps talking about Oklahoma. Everybody keeps wanting to brag about, or not brag, but bring up Oklahoma's Big 12 record. It doesn't matter. The Big 12 record is not something that's taken into consideration by the committee. Argue whether they should or not. They're not going to look at the 6-12 record in the Big 12 and say that that's prohibitive.
I mean, when you see just the quad one records for those teams, Oklahoma's 6-10, and Xavier's 1-8. I don't think there's much of an argument to be made, that Oklahoma shouldn't be in over Xavier at that point, right?
Well, but I think to the point of the bracket right now, Oklahoma is over Xavier. Like I
know, but that's what I'm saying. You're saying like a lot of Xavier fans are calling out Oklahoma. I don't think that's the team you should be calling out.
No. To me, this week, if you're a Xavier fan looking to maybe jump a spot, I've gotten a bunch of questions today of, can Xavier avoid Dayton? I think. Well, for one, if Xavier wins the Big East tournament, you can't play in Dayton. They will not play in Dayton at that point because it's the last 4 at-large teams and then the 16 seeds. So they will not play in Dayton if they were to win the Big East tournament. That's one way straight up to avoid it. Another way that Xavier, I think, could avoid Dayton would be Indiana and Ohio State both losing their openers of the Big East tournament, because those would both be tough losses for the committee to have to deal with. Again, just from a record standpoint, you look at Ohio State right now, who's the second to last team in on Bracket Matrix. They would end their season at 17-15. I don't know if there's ever been a team put in that's just 2 games over 500. So that would be a really hard one for the committee to justify. So if you're talking about jumping spots to get out of Dayton, Indiana and Ohio State would be the 2.
Paul, let me ask you about what's the fascination with San Diego State? I could argue San Diego State should not be in the field.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you on that one.
Yeah, I mean they've got pretty much worse metrics than Xavier. I mean, there's, it goes back and forth a little bit depending on what you're looking at. Their out of conference strength of schedule is huge for them. They have the 7th best out of conference strength of schedule by net. But aside from that, I mean, they have pretty similar metrics to Xavier. Their overall record's 20-8. They're 3-5 in quad one games, so it's not like that's some huge boost for them there. They've also lost a quad 3 game. I know that the quad system isn't the end all be all, but when you're looking through the other metrics too, I don't see a reason why they're above some of these other teams like Oklahoma and even Indiana or North Carolina or Xavier.
And not only that, they're in 86 of the 87 brackets today on Bracket Matrix. So they are pretty firmly in the field as of Monday. But yeah, if they were to take an early loss, I don't know who they're playing in the first round of the Mountain West tournament. And we saw how much the Mountain West was valued last year. But as Rocco just pointed out on the... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't understand why they like Boise State either.
Well, and that's where I think if you look at, some of these teams like Boise State, Colorado State, I forget which one of them, but one of those 2 teams, I think it was Colorado State. What the committee hasn't valued as much are teams that build their resume within the Mountain West. And the teams that are winning games just beating up on each other. So that's where I would say, Colorado State, you're not talking about them as
and
much.
Boise's 120 out of conference as well.
Yeah, I would say Boise is on the outside looking in. Really, it's the teams this week, like you said, San Diego State, Oklahoma, but I think Oklahoma's pretty firmly in the field now. Indiana and Ohio State are the two that I'm looking at.
Those four teams you just listed in that order are the four teams directly above Xavier getting at large bids according to Bracket Matrix.
Okay, well then there you go. So and sneaky one team, Baylor.
They are up in the 10 seed line, I believe.
They are, but if Baylor was to lose their opening game of the Big 12 tournament, I'm just going to sit here and say on Monday afternoon, I wouldn't fall on the floor if they missed the tournament altogether. I'm not going to say it's going to happen, but I have started to see some projections of Xavier and Baylor playing each other in Dayton. And I forget his name. Baylor's the big guy for Baylor. I'm blanking on him right now, but Baylor's big man. He's like 6'10", 6'11", like 300-pound like monster. What's his name? He's probably like 240. But anyway, whatever his name is, I forget his name. He's out for the season, and Baylor is I think 3-5 without him. So when we talked about that for a while on the show a few minutes ago, and I think that's where the committee looking at injuries, is that something that they look at. But at the end of the day, for Xavier, if you win on Thursday and there aren't a million bid thieves, you feel pretty good that on Sunday night you're going to hear your name called.
Yeah, I mean, but that's I saying there's no bid thieves is not an easy thing for it to happen. I mean, oftentimes there are at least a bid thief or two, and if Xavier is truly that last team on the cut line, you could be susceptible. Also, I mean, what we just talked about, I mean, we mentioned those four teams you listed are the teams right above them. Right after them currently on Bracket Matrix is North Carolina, Boise State, Texas, UC Irvine, and Colorado State. I would say, again, the only two teams out of those that I actually worry about being capable of jumping Xavier are North Carolina and Texas. I don't think there's really an argument for Boise State, UC Irvine, or Colorado State to jump Xavier, regardless of whether Xavier wins or loses.
No, I guess maybe Irvine with 17 wins away from home, you could kind of say that maybe Irvine deserves a shot, maybe-ish. And another good point, I'm going to just keep going back, hammering my guy Rocco here. 7 of the 12 selection committee members this year are from mid-major teams or conferences. So maybe this year, that's something that you could say that the mid-major guys would look out for their own. If Irvine was to lose to UC San Diego in the Big West final, that maybe the Big West is a 2-bid league because UC San Diego is going to get in, barring a collapse early there, but they should get in. So yeah, I just think that if Xavier wins on Thursday, the other thing too about the A10, I go on about VCU. If VCU drops an early one, I don't think they're a lock.
It looks like Bracket Matrix would have them above Xavier and some others right now in the field, but I do not think they're an at-large team without.
No, I very much think that if VCU was to lose, now if they lose to Dayton in like a great game on Sunday, all right, that's a 2-bid league. But again, by Sunday they've already made the brackets. So
maybe. Exactly. I don't know if it is or not, honestly, looking at the
last thing I'll say, and I know I'm being redundant because I said this on the last podcast, but just in case you didn't hear it, I think it is very helpful to Xavier that they play this game against Marquette at 2:30 on Thursday, because that's right when the bracket is starting to take shape. Teams are getting voted in. The committee's watching all these games during the day. If Xavier picks up another quad 1 win at 2:30 on Thursday afternoon, I think that is very, very beneficial for them getting the benefit of the doubt.
So that is a perfect segue. That was way too much bracketology talk. I apologize for us going so long on that, but we haven't really hashed it out like that yet on this show. So that was good to get your take on all of that. Xavier is the 4 seed playing 5 seed Marquette, 2:30 p.m. on Thursday. You can watch it on the Cock. Peacock is streaming that one, which everyone has enjoyed the Peacock streams this year. I think everyone was upset initially, but after they saw the product, they like it, right? Yeah,
it's Noah Eagle on the play-by-play for the Peacock games. Great. Fanta will be on the sidelines. I forget who the analyst is for these games this week. It is, Donnie Marshall. Okay, so Noah Eagle, Donnie Marshall on the games, and then John Fanta will be on the sidelines.
Paul, I am pumped for this Thursday Big East game. You know me, I'm not, this isn't usually how I am with games, but is this the most anticipated Big East tournament game in a while? Just from a standpoint of Xavier really needs it. And it's not like where they've really needed it in some other years where they're limping to the finish line and you're just hoping they can somehow stay in the field. But it's like they've got a lot of momentum going. People are excited about what they can do in the Big East tournament. And obviously you need the win for your at-large chances. And the fact that it's 2:30 p.m. on a Thursday, it's like that perfect get out of work early, start your happy hour early. Maybe you took Friday off to watch more championship week type stuff. This just has all the makings of a great Thursday afternoon.
You could not possibly find two more different fan bases right now than what Marquette fans are feeling and what Xavier fans are feeling, because Marquette limped to the finish line. They just got their hearts ripped out by St. John's on a buzzer beater by Zuby Ejiofor on senior day at Fiserv Forum. Xavier ends the season on a 7-game winning streak. They have everything out there in front of them. Xavier has everything to play for. I'm not saying at all that Marquette is, going to lay down in this game. But the other thing too is Marquette has significantly slid down. I think they're projected maybe in as a 7 seed right now.
They're a little banged up,
but they're safely in, but they're banged up. Stevie Mitchell, Chase Ross, maybe not 100%. Who knows by Thursday, but just they're a little banged up. They haven't been shooting the ball well. The 245th best 3-point shooting team in the country. They don't have the true big that really gives you a ton of, problems. I don't know, Rick. I think this is about as good as Xavier could ask for.
Are you with me though? Are you really looking forward to this game on Thursday?
I cannot remember a Xavier Big East tournament game that I was looking forward to more than this one, because even 2 years ago, obviously you could say, Paul, the Big East tournament championship game, but that was once you got there, right? I mean, obviously Friday into Saturday, you were looking forward to that, but Xavier played Creighton on a Thursday afternoon, maybe in 2019 when Xavier was close. I think it was 2019, somewhere in there. But just with the way Xavier is playing, because for me, Rick, this game is a chance for Xavier to really show the progress that they've made on a national level. I mean, you have a big time game. I know it's on Peacock, but that Peacock broadcast is elite with those guys. You have a big time crew, a big time atmosphere. All the St. John's fans are going to be, I'm sure a lot of them will stick around. It'll be a loud environment. It's not like it's going to be a dead afternoon session. I tend to think that this is a game that Xavier could have a really, really nice afternoon on Thursday.
All right, good stuff from Paul Fritschner there. As always, really appreciate him joining me. We had some technical difficulties to end the show. You guys didn't really miss anything. We were pretty much done with our conversation, but we had our audio cut out there at the end. So I'm recording this after the fact here to wrap it up, but be sure to check out the All In docuseries. Catch all of Paul's hard work there. The new episode premieres Tuesday night, 11:30 p.m. on Fox 19. So check that out. Also, the Rebound Rundown podcast, you can find that every weekday. Good time of year for that is we're getting into March Madness. So we'll talk about all of that. Xavier's trip into the Big East tournament, whatever else is ahead for them in the postseason and the offseason, all at musketeerreport.com on the premium message board. Thanks.